Hello and welcome to 5 Hot Tactics for Modernizing Your Group Policy Deployments. This webinar is brought to you by SDM Software and ActualTech Media. During the webinar, if you have questions, we'd love to hear them. Please use the GoToWebinar question box to ask those questions, and we'll be answering them throughout the presentation as well as during our Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We'll be doing 3 poll questions during the webinar, and we greatly appreciate your participation in those. It helps us to learn a little bit more about our audience and tailor future webinars. Now, for one lucky attendee, we have a $300 Apple gift card that you could use to purchase a super cool new Apple Watch or put towards whatever Apple product you choose. We'll do the drawing for that gift card at the end of the webinar, and we really appreciate SDM Software for providing that excellent prize. So stay tuned for that. We've got a lot of great group policy tactics to talk about here, and we've got 2 Microsoft MVPs and true experts on the topic of group policy. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about who's presenting today. First off, my name is David Davis, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. I'm a 6-time VMware vExpert, an MCSE, CCIE, and a video training author on enterprise technology topics. I'm the co-owner of ActualTech Media, and you can find me on Twitter as David M. Davis. I'm honored to be joined today by Darren Mar-Elia. He's the president and founder of SDM Software. He has more than 30 years of IT and software experience in configuration and system management technology, especially in the area of role-based delegation and Active Directory. He has experience in automation with the group policy SDK, PowerShell, and he's had various roles in enterprise IT and software organizations, including CTO of the Windows Management Solutions group at Quest Software, Director of Distributed Infrastructure at Charles Schwab, and a Senior Director of Product Engineering at Desktop Standard, which was acquired by Microsoft. He's a Microsoft MVP in group policy technology, and he has been for the last 12 years. He's written and spoke on Active Directory, group policy, PowerShell, and other topics around the world. He maintains a popular group policy resource site called GPOGUY.com, and he's a contributing editor to Windows IT Pro magazine from 1997 to 2014. He's written and contributed to 12 books, and I'm honored to have him on the call. Also joining us today is Kevin Sullivan. He's the Vice President of Product Management and Business Development for SDM Software. He has over 20 years of enterprise product management experience working at Alita Software, Microsoft, SpecOps, and other companies. He's also a Microsoft Group Policy MVP, and he's passionate about GPO, directory services, PowerShell, and other technologies. He recently joined SDM Software to help companies around the world modernize their Active Directory infrastructure. So now that you know a little bit about who we are and who today's presenters are, I'll go ahead and hand this webinar over to Darren and Kevin. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, David. And I think we have a poll question to start off with, just a quick one. Let me see, how does that work? Here we go. So you should see the poll. And while that poll is up, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we mean when we talk about SDM software, or I'm sorry, about group policy modernization. So, you know, we've been working with a lot of customers over the years. Group policy is now something like 15 years old. And what we've seen is that group policy has grown up very organically in a lot of organizations. And what I mean by that is that group policy objects have been created hither and yon for various reasons without a lot of controls, without a lot of the things that we typically think about in terms of kind of governance within IT. And so we've got a lot of customers that are coming to us asking us to help them modernize their existing group policy environments. And so when we talk about group policy modernization, that's kind of what we're talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I appreciate your voting on that. And so then let's just kind of dive in. I'm going to hand it over to Kevin in a quick moment, but I wanted to just kind of lay out how we're going to approach this. We're going to talk a little bit about the 5 tips or the 5 tactics that we've advertised in the webinar, show you a little bit about how SDM helps with group policy management. And then, as promised, I've got a very cool secret bonus tip right after the demo of products that relates to group policy preferences. And then we'll kind of wrap up in Q&A and all that fun stuff. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin, and he's going to kind of guide us through the 5 tips. And I'm going to be dropping into demo mode occasionally, so we won't bore you with PowerPoint slides too much.
Thank you very much, Darren. I wanted to thank everyone for joining. And first, I want to correct David a little bit. I'm actually a recovering MVP. I was a group policy MVP for a few years, and then I became a part of the team at Microsoft, and due to conflicts of interest, I guess you can't be an MVP and a Microsoft employee at the same time. So just to clear that up.
But Kevin, to be clear, you ran group policy for a while, so that counts for something.
That does count for a little bit. And I would like to say that you can give me credit for all the great stuff and don't blame me for anything you don't like. So we'll see how that goes. But I've been doing GP for a long time, and these 5 areas that we wanted to talk about and dive into a little bit have consistently come up as areas that are important and potentially problematic or challenging, but there are some really cool tidbits of info or techniques or tactics that we can present to you that might make your lives easier. So the first one is linking. And when you're doing config, I'm going to just assume, Darren, that you'll slide through the slides, but
yep.
When you're doing general group policy, of course, linking is only one part of the puzzle. It's only one piece of information that helps you get the right configuration out to the right users and computers. And this one piece has multiple layers to it, so it's worth exploring a little bit. And the 2 areas that we wanted to explore here in this slide is really just about what you can see and deal with in the GPMC itself, and then what you can see and deal with within PowerShell. If you're going down that path yet. So if you want to jump into your demo environment there, that's probably
will do. Hopefully you can see my screen.
I see it fine. It looks great.
Great.
Excellent logo in the middle. So first off, when you're looking at the GPMC, the actual group policy object, or actually what is most close to the actual GPO, lives underneath that group policy object's container. What you see underneath OUs is just a reference or a representation of the link. So you can see the engineering general GPO and the security GPO. Those are just links. If you have all the messaging turned on in the GPMC and you went to edit that link, if you double-clicked or right-clicked and edit, you'd get a message that said, hey, you're actually editing the real GPO. This is just a link that's being represented here. But if you can see what Darren is looking at, underneath the engineering container, you see these 2 GPOs that are directly linked here. But if you go down to that exact GPO down in the group policy object container, you'll see a slightly different representation of this. And you'll see what other OUs that GPO may be linked to. Now, one of the things that got me stuck at the beginning, and Darren, I don't know if you had a similar experience years ago, but I used to always associate the link with the group policy object itself, and I would just think that way. That's how my brain functioned. Here's this group policy object, a blob of config, and I want to link it somewhere, and I figured the link was metadata on the GPO. The link is actually metadata on the container, not on the GPO itself, which is something that gets exposed really nicely elsewhere. So if you can pop back up to that OU, Darren.
Yep.
You can see 2 tabs here that are important. Link group policy objects directly linked to this OU. You're going to be able to see the enabled, the enforced bits, WMI filters, all of that great stuff. But you can't forget about the inheritance. So the second tab there, is going to show you all of the GPOs that will flow down to this OU, because the total picture is going to be cumulative. I think that's probably enough of GPMC. Now,
I think it's, just quickly, I think it's also worth pointing out that, and it kind of goes to this particular tip that we're about to get into, is that the more stuff that you have being inherited, the more you have to sort of worry about what's being inherited. So that may seem obvious, but the stuff that's coming from on high will obviously impact this engineering OU. In this case, it's a policy called enforced policy that's linked at the domain, and then the default domain policy that's also linked at the domain. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the more stuff that's linked at the domain level, or higher up from wherever you're dealing with, the more challenging it gets.
I totally agree. And this list is actually very reasonable, I think.
Yes, right.
I've seen customers where this list is 20, 30 deep.
Yeah.
And having to sort through, oh my gosh, what is hitting me, when, where, why, and how. We'll get into that a little bit later, but this is one of those places that you're going to look at to get a good sense of, okay, what have I gotten myself into? Or for a lot of us, what did the guy who worked this job before me, how did he set the table, and now I have to deal with that reality. So good info. Go back to link group policy objects real quick, Darren. Don't forget about these. You see the third, fourth, fifth columns here. Don't forget about those either. Is the GPO enforced? Is the link actually turned on? Is it turned on for both computer and user? Those are pieces of metadata that are going to come into play in your troubleshooting. But let's just look at the PowerShell super quick. There's 3 different things that I thought are interesting from a PowerShell perspective. And one is, if I look at get GPO, and if you call up a specific group policy object, maybe that engineering, whatever it happens to be, and a little tip here. Now this commandlet actually delivers to the screen pretty much everything in the object, but if you rerun that and pipe it to format list asterisk, you'll see that there's not a bunch of additional information. I personally like to, because I don't have all of the commandlets committed to memory, I like to go in and make sure I'm seeing everything. But if you can see here, there's no information in this object natively that represents link information. There's some tricky ways to get to it, but by default that commandlet is a little lacking. But if you do get AD organizational unit on that engineering OU, if you're new to PowerShell, autocomplete is your friend. I love the tab, but
or even if you're not new.
that was not meant as a dig in any way. So you can see the third, fourth bit of data in this returned object is a linked group policy objects, and it has a list. It's actually a bit of a hash table of all of the different GPOs that are associated or linked to this OU. They're referenced here by GUID name, which can be a little hairy, but as you get into your real automation and scripting, super, super easy to resolve that out to the name. But there's another cool commandlet called, what is it called? Get
GP inheritance.
Inheritance, that's it.
Yeah.
And when you look at that OU, you're going to see this commandlet actually resolves to the display name of the GPO, which I think is super cool. So you can see separated the direct links, engineering general, engineering security, and then you can see the inherited links as well. So anyway, whatever your bread and butter is, GUI or PowerShell, you're going to be able to find all the info on links. But that brings us to the tip, if you want to jump back over.
Yep.
And Darren really nailed it. You want to link as close to your configured objects or as close to your targets as possible It's not always possible to be right there. You're going to have reasons to link above a little bit. But if you have a general rule to link as close to the target as possible, your troubleshooting is going to be easier. It's going to be a much more flexible environment for you to adapt to changes. And we believe that that's a really good tactic for you guys to keep in mind.
And sort of the I guess I never get the term right, but the addendum to this is that you want to try to avoid linking at the domain level and then setting those links to enforced. And the reason I say that is because I've been in environments where there were a lot of domain linked GPOs set to enforced because people thought that was what you did. And what happens is you absolutely take away the flexibility downstream. So enforced means this policy and the settings within this GPO win over any other downstream policies, which is not normally the case. Normally the order of processing is that the stuff that's linked closest to your computers and users is what's going to win if there's a conflict. Well, when you set enforced, that kind of reverses that algorithm, and everything that's enforced at that domain level is absolutely the law across every machine or user that it's targeting. So you reduce your flexibility tremendously by doing this, linking at the domain and enforcing. And I've seen environments where that has caused endless grief because they're not able to cleanly undo what has been done at the domain level. There's also a risk factor in putting a lot of stuff at the domain level. If you make a mistake in a GPO, maybe it's different filtering or something goes wrong, you are impacting everything in the domain that's targeted by that GPO. And so I have seen literally a group policy change at the domain level lock out all users in a 10,000, 15,000 workstation environment from being able to log in. So not fun.
Yeah,
okay.
I used to call those career-limiting configuration choices.
Exactly.
There's obviously reason for the capability to be there, but I tend to agree with Darren. If you avoid those enforcements at a high level, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache when you're troubleshooting. One of the MVPs in the PowerShell world, a guy named Don Jones, who you may be familiar with, he is a great guy, super smart, has done amazing stuff for the community. Part of his shtick, though, I don't mean to be critical in any way, but he sort of lacks tact on purpose. So one of the things that he'll say, if you're enforcing policies on high, usually it's because you don't trust the admins who are controlling those objects in the sub-OUs. And he's a little bit less diplomatic than I would be, but he'll tell you straight out, oh, you need to fire those people. If you don't trust them, get rid of them. They should be eliminated.
Yeah, maybe just take away their edit rights.
All right, so as we said, linking was one piece of the puzzle about who is going to be the victim or the recipient of my config, but applicability is really important as well. This gets into security filtering or access control lists or access control entries, even down to WMI filters. We're talking mostly here about security filtering. And the idea of keeping it simple, that old school KISS principle, is sort of important. So when you're applying or creating new GPOs, our recommendation, we believe a good technique, is to keep the default access control info as much as you possibly can. You're going to have situations where you have solutions or service accounts that are a little different than the defaults, but if you can keep the defaults for applicability, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache. And if you want to jump over to the GPMC, this one is very easy to see. If you just create a GPO, a test GPO to look at, you'll notice this group policy object,
of which I have many.
the default ACL, it's not linked anywhere, right? This top pane here is about linking. But the security filtering says apply this to authenticated users. Don't let the name of that security group confuse you. That includes all computers and all users who have successfully authenticated to your domain. For all intents and purposes, that's all users and computers that you care about. And that usually works. Mucking with that or changing that for specific reasons increases your troubleshooting needs. So be aware of that. The security filtering, that scope that we call it here, is only one piece of the access control entry. If you go over to the delegation tab, you actually see the actual access control list as it's applied. And for those of you who are familiar with GP, you know that group policy is actually two pieces of info. It's the information in sysvol, file system information that sits under domain controllers, but it's also information stored in AD. And that AD data is protected by permissions as well. And you can show that if you open up ADUC, you can see it in the system container.
Do you want me to go do that?
Yeah, sure. So you can see all these policies, this GUI here, that are referenced by those GUIDs for the policies. Those are the actual GPOs, and they have access control info on them to restrict access.
So what you see in that GPMC GUI under delegation, roughly, and I say roughly because it's not a one-to-one visual match, but it roughly corresponds to what you're going to see under the security tab of this AD object here. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so be aware of that. If you go and change the default behaviors, you change authenticated users to the marketing group, you may introduce things into your environment that aren't as intuitive as you may expect. So be aware of that. We also, and Darren years ago built a little tool to find deny access control entries in here. And once you put a deny in here, the default permissions to be able to apply a group policy object is going to be read. You need to be able to read it, and then apply group policy is the other permission. If you put a deny in there, your troubleshooting increases exponentially.
Yeah, in fact, I think I have an example of that here. If you go up to the aptly named deny test, you'll notice that the denies show up as custom in the allowed permissions. So it doesn't say deny anywhere, and you actually have to go into this little advanced button down here in the lower right to actually see that as a deny. So in the in the UI, it's not intuitive at all to look at a GPO and see that it's got a deny on it.
Yeah, if you jump over to PowerShell for a second, Darren and I found a bit of anomaly recently in one of the commandlets. It's actually a method on getGPO to find the security info.
Right.
And it does the same thing as the GPMC. It does not show the deny. It just shows the ACE. So it would say Darren has X permission. It doesn't say that it's a deny.
And if I can type, we'll see that. Right, so this JTibble trustee, this user here, JTibble, has the permission GPO apply. It almost makes it look like that's an actual allow. There's nowhere that it says that it's a deny, but indeed it is a deny. Same with the sales users group. So these are Yep, go ahead.
It's interesting because this is a method that was provided on top of a group policy commandlet. And there is a generic commandlet called getACL, getACL.
Right.
And getACL is provider-based, so you can actually find ACLs on AD data or file system or registry or whatever. But when you drill into the object in AD for the GPO, it will expose the deny
right.
permission, which is sort of nice. And keep paying attention because maybe I'll blog about that and point out those differences. I find this pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
But you can imagine applicability is complicated. There's a lot of stuff. If you go back over to the slide, the second tip, since I have children in my house and we don't say the word stupid, is if you can go to the next slide, keep it simple, keep it silly simple, instead of keep it simple stupid, because I don't want my kids to say huge impact on your troubleshooting. So every time you can simplify your world, you're going to solve your problems much quicker. Do you agree?
I agree 100%. And you know, there's definitely valid reasons, just like there was for linking at the domain level. There's definitely valid reasons in using security groups, in using deny aces, in using WMI filters. So we're not saying don't use them. I think that's a key piece. But what we're saying is don't make that a normal part of your approach. And I think if you take the previous tip of linking as close to your intended target as possible, then you can more easily live in this world of security groups and deny aces and WMI filters by exception only. And it just, you know, it's going to make life a lot easier and more predictable, as the tip entails. Yep.
And also remember that your organization will evolve, and if the default behavior is you keep it simple, the next person coming in is going to have a much easier job adopting or adapting. So the third area was reporting. You've got a ton of goo in your environment. How do you get information out of it? And Darren, I'm going to let you sort of lead this because you have some really great tactical tips about reporting data and what it can do for you.
Yeah. So I think, you know, the biggest thing that I come across are questions that come up in forums and such about why group policy isn't getting processed by a particular user or computer. And oftentimes it's a targeting issue or it's maybe a filtering issue. But the bottom line is it's sort of a black box sometimes. You know, I call it push and pray, because you make your change to your GPO and you pray that it actually works and you don't get a lot of feedback. And I'm going to show you how we help with that on the product side in a little bit. But the bottom line here is that there are some pretty good tools in the box for generating this kind of information. And so what I'm going to do quickly is just drop out to the GUI again and show you a couple different ways of doing that. So my favorite way, everyone's got their favorite way, but my favorite way is to run an RSOP report. And RSOP just means result and set of policy. It's been in the box since, I want to say, it wasn't in Windows 2000. It came on in Windows XP. And it was the ability to go out, reach across the network to a particular machine and find out what happened to group policy processing on that machine for a particular user that may have logged into that machine. So what I've done here is I've gone ahead and I've run a group policy results wizard, and you can just run the wizard and pick a machine and pick a user. And just for the sake of timing, I'm going to go ahead and show all on this report that's run. And what you see here is 3 tabs across the top: summary, settings, and policy events. Now this information is, to my way of thinking, the place to start when you are trying to figure out what's going on with group policy. It's broken out by computer and by user, so you can see each side of the equation. And on the computer side, you have underneath there, you have this group policy objects section. This is the answer to that question: why did my GPO not get delivered? I have a subheading of applied GPOs and a section called denied GPOs. Under denied GPOs, I can see exactly under reason denied why the group policy engine thinks that this GPOs or these particular GPOs didn't get applied. There's a whole bevy of ones here. I've got a disabled link on this GPO. I also can't even read it because I'm only seeing the GUID, so I don't have read permissions on it. This particular GPO is empty. I'm not going to process this policy if my client detects it as being empty. This one is inaccessible, meaning I don't have permissions to read it. This one is disabled. So somebody has gone and set the status on this GPO to disabled. And then this one finally is false WMI filter. I've failed the WMI filter that's associated with this GPO called test tattoo. And then I've got the list of GPOs that apply to me. So this is provided both on the computer and the user side. And you know, this can often solve a lot of your problems, because if you're looking for why a particular GPO didn't apply, and you don't see it either in the applied list or in the denied list, you've got a targeting issue, meaning you're targeting the wrong thing. And this is very common because, as we all know, group policy objects only apply to users and computers in AD. They don't apply to groups. They don't apply to contact objects. They don't apply, to other kinds of objects. They only apply to users and groups. So they have to be linked in a way that the user or group can actually see them and process them. And then finally, what I'll mention is this component status. And this shows the status of each of the policy areas that get processed by the computer and user. Group policy infrastructure is what I call the core part of GP processing. If that fails, all the other parts of GP processing will fail. However, if that succeeds, you can have a failure within a particular policy area and the others can continue to work. So just key information that you can get out of RSOP in the box. You also have the ability to do this in PowerShell using the get GP resultant policy. And I can do computer. Let me just let it catch up to me here. I might have typed the get GP resultant set of policy, computer, Cabernet, user, cPandle Darren, and report type. I can tell it I want an HTML report, and then path for the report, c:\data, rsop.html. And it's going to go out and do that same report that I just ran in the GUI in GPMC, and it's going to give me an HTML file that looks exactly like this report over here. So what's the tip? The tip is RSOP reports are alive and well, and you definitely should consider them your first line of defense in terms of trying to figure out where problems reside.
Yeah, there is just so much good data in those reports, and one of the pieces leads us to this fourth area, which is performance. And as Darren was going through it and you saw all of the different components in there, each one of those components has a different profile, essentially, for how they perform and for what they're doing. When I first joined Microsoft, it was such a great opportunity for me because I had made a huge investment in the Microsoft world for my whole career, and then suddenly I found myself in a very nice position on the engineering team running a bunch of program managers who owned group policy and a bunch of other technologies. And it was awesome. And one day I'm sitting at my desk and literally the president of the Windows group, Steven Sinofsky, got into work and he's booting his computer and he stared at a screen that said group policy is processing for far too long and somehow found me and wanted me to explain to him why it was taking so long to process. So this tip for me is very personal, and it potentially could be really enlightening for all of you. So understanding how GP performs is really super important. And a lot of the reporting data you're going to find. And Darren, if you want to mention this white paper that you linked to here.
Yeah, we actually we have a product called GPO Exporter that I'll show you in a minute, and it's kind of your inventory and analysis tool for group policy settings. And we actually worked with the group policy product team after Kevin left to come up with a set of canned reports on what Microsoft was referring to as kind of slow boot, slow log on, and the impacts on the user experience from a group policy perspective. And those reports and the kind of the underlying details of those are out on our website. This link is right here, but you can also go to our GPO Exporter product page. I'm just going to quickly flip over to here and GPO Exporter under products, and you can see, if you go down to the bottom, you can see the white paper right here under this link, so you can download it right there from that link and get all the kind of details around how that works.
Yeah, and again, just like most things in Windows management, it's complex. It's worth taking the time to understand what the difference between the performance of the script extension versus the registry extension versus QoS or whatever it happens to be. It's good to understand what the impact, not only on logon, but on just general performance. We bring up synchronous and asynchronous group policy processing. You can't forget about foreground and background group policy processing. And then also, when you have a bloated GP environment, you have a ton of group policy objects. No one really knows what's configuring who. There's a lot of redundant settings and excessive settings in those GPOs. The client has to process through every single one of them. So if you can imagine the client looks at a bit of GP configuration and says, oh, I need to set this configuration item, great. If it has 15 GPOs that all have different values for that, that's a different story altogether. So the tip here is pretty simple. The tip for this is really learn the impact, read that white paper, really learn the impact of the different extensions and meta group policy functions, because that's going to give you the knowledge that you need to be a great troubleshooter and to make things run as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say on this is that one common behavior that I see that is just sort of a normal reaction to, I'm an IT person that's got a lot of balls in the air and I just need to get something done quickly. And sometimes what I'll see is folks will take the copy and paste feature in group policy a little too wholeheartedly, and they've got a GPO that's got some settings that they really want, but they want to add some other settings to it, and they'll just copy and paste an existing GPO, and maybe they'll take the time to clear out the settings that they don't need that are redundant, but maybe they won't, and you end up with a lot of GPOs linked at a lot of different places in the environment that look almost the same except for maybe one or two settings. And so that's where you get into this scenario where your clients are having to do a lot more work than they probably should in order to process policy.
Yeah. All right, so the fifth area, near and dear to my heart, group policy preferences, is the evolution of a bit of technology called, that came to Microsoft through the acquisition of a company called Desktop Standard. And they were individual extensions for configuring all kinds of different things. One of the big pitches for GP preferences was a lot of the things that you do in complex scripts, or a lot of the things that have been scripted to configure your end nodes in your environment. Those scripts can get super complex. They can get longer and longer and longer. They're usually built by people with a lot of experience that don't necessarily take the time to make those scripts run as well as possible, so they can get they can add to your overhead quite a bit. And then the person who wrote the scripts will walk away from the organization, and then you have to deal with this multi-hundred line script that's doing general configuration. Learning GP preferences, understanding what you can do in there, and starting to convert your scripts over to GP preferences is a very, very valuable tactic. So if you can pull up an editor real quick just to show them a view. One of the things that I found in working with organizations for a long time is that a lot of people still don't know these things exist. And that's really the fault of those of us who were a part of the team when we released the preferences. We didn't spend enough time evangelizing and educating. But underneath computer config and user config, you're going to see this list of new nodes to do everything from deploy environmental variables to scheduled tasks and managing power options and drive mappings and printers and registry config. All kinds of very interesting tactical needs can be accomplished as individual items, configuration items in GP. So I don't know if you have more to say about that. I know that you've done some interesting stuff with the preferences, Darren.
No, I think just to follow on this and kind of basically kind of get the tip out there. The goal here is that a lot of organizations have startup scripts, logon scripts. If you've worked with Microsoft and done what's called a desktop wrap, which is where Microsoft Professional Services will come in and assess your environment for its performance. What I've seen with many of these is that the scripts that have built up over time, and they may be the old AD-based scripts or they may be GP-based scripts, but they collect and oftentimes are the biggest culprit of slowdown in the environment. So you've got scripts that are doing registry hacks, scripts that are doing drive and printer mappings, and they run every time. There's no logic in them to say, if I've already run before, don't run again, unlike group policy. So I've been encouraging folks for a while now to really try hard to get off of logon scripts and startup scripts in favor of GP preferences. You get the benefits of the GP engine, all the efficiencies in it, all the targeting capabilities. There's troubleshooting tools, as you saw, so you get a lot of the benefits, and you also can, as a result, basically improve the performance of your environment. So I definitely encourage folks who aren't already doing this to take it on as a big kind of modernization effort. Okay, so I think we have, let's see, we have a poll. So let me just go ahead and get to the poll. And let's see here. Just a quick poll about PowerShell usage. We're always interested in how folks are using PowerShell. And in the meantime, I'm going to just see if I can get to a couple questions that have come in. One question is, there's a command line tool to perform the same reporting. I think that that the gentleman was referring to the RSOP reporting. Just discovered this a few weeks ago when I was having a GP application issue. And yes, absolutely, there's a poll called, a command line utility that's not PowerShell called gpresult.exe that ships in the box in Windows. And you can definitely get all of the same data as you can get from the PowerShell commandlet or even the GPMC interface. So that's a great tip there. And it looks like
I want to add something there, though, if I can, Darren. GP result is great, and like you said, it's quick and dirty. And one of the things that it gives you very quickly is the info on what's applied to the user, what's applied to the computer, what hasn't applied, and why. Great stuff. The get GP result instead of policy PowerShell commandlet provides the same information a little bit more. When you're looking at some modern OS implementations, you're actually going to see performance data down to the extension level, which is very cool. It's an excuse to start learning and expressing yourself in the PowerShell world. So don't shy away from PowerShell, embrace it, jump in, use GP result because it's great and it does the job, but try to adopt to the new stuff as well because you're going to get more out of it and you're going to learn valuable skills that are going to start to move you along. So that's the only thing I'd add to that.
Yep, thank you. So what we're going to do now is kind of shift into a quick demo of the SDM solutions that help out with this GP modernization, and then I'm going to share my secret bonus tip, which won't take long, and then hopefully we'll have some time left for questions. So just a little bit about what we do in the group policy space. So the SDM has been dedicated to helping folks manage group policy, and we've got kind of 4 different product areas that we focus on right now. So the first one is reporting with the reporting pack, and that's composed of our GPO Compare and GPO Exporter product, and I'll show you that. It's really that kind of a lot of customers coming to us, giving us looking to clean up and consolidate their group policy environments, and the reporting pack really helps with that. GP auditing and attestation, real-time change auditing for all changes related to group policy, everything from new GPOs being created to settings being modified. We also have the ability to roll back those changes and to provide what we call attestation or certification of GPOs, which I'll talk about in the demo. GP Compliance Manager, our newest product, answers that question. How do I know that my Windows servers and desktops are getting the group policy settings that I pushed and prayed for? That's a real outstanding challenge that folks have had for a long time with group policy, is kind of being able to answer that question across the environment. And then finally, the group policy automation engine really is our SDK for making changes to group policy settings using PowerShell. And so what I want to do now is just dive in and show you in these products in action. So I've got my little test machine here. Clear out my screen, and I'm going to just show you Group Policy Compare to start with. As the name implies, it's designed to let you compare GPOs. You can compare up to 4 at a time. They can be live, they can be backups, or something we call exporter snapshots. I'm going to do a quick comparison of 3 GPOs. So I'm going to go ahead and browse my existing environment. I've got my default domain policy that I'm going to grab. Then I'm going to grab another GPO in the environment that I call the copy of the default domain policy, where I've made some changes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop into the child domain that I have in this forest, and I'm going to grab its default domain policy and run a comparison. And both of these, both the compare and exporter products have the ability to do what I'm doing in the GUI from a PowerShell commandlet. So we love PowerShell here at SDM, and so we try to PowerShell enable as many of our products as it makes sense to. And so what you see here in the results are a grid view that shows you kind of quickly in the first column the setting path as you would see it in the group policy editor. And then subsequent columns, you've got my baseline GPO that I selected first. That's what the other GPOs are compared against. And then in red, you see the differences between the baseline and this GPO, or this one. And then in green, you've got settings that are actually missing from the baseline. In this case, I've got some LAN manager hash values in my child domain that are set that are not set in my baseline policy. I can also flip the view around quickly and just see what settings are the same across these three GPOs. Those are the ones in blue. So really quick and easy way to get at the data. And I can also search on keywords within the data. So I can find the word password as it exists in this list. I can include metadata in my comparison, which is things like the permissions on the GPO, the places where the GPO is linked. So all of those can be included in the comparison if you want. And finally, I can generate this out to a report. So if I want to get this out to Excel, PDF, Word, I can get this data out really quickly and easily. So a lot of power in a fairly simple package, but it gives you the ability to do this comparison. I can compare live to backups, or I can compare backups to backups, whatever the scenario happens to be. Now let me shift gears and talk about Exporter, which is sort of my inventory and analysis tool. I mentioned the canned reports in Exporter. What I'm going to do is show you, kind of walk through a quick scenario. I can either export settings out of GPOs in this kind of flat list that you see here, or I can do it based on how they're linked. So I can come down here to my engineering workstations OU. I can grab all of the GPOs that are processed by that, including the ones at the domain level. And then I can actually select which policy areas I want to export. So if I wanted to only export a particular policy area, in other words, I wanted to discover where that policy area existed within my environment, I can do that pretty easily. And I'm going to go ahead and run the export. And what we're doing is going out and grabbing the settings out of those GPOs and storing them here in the product. So you see here a view that's somewhat similar to what you saw in GPO Compare. And you've got all the settings, and you can sort the paths, and you can search on them just like I could in the GPO Compare product. I can also filter on the search term. So if I'm looking for a setting that contains a particular keyword, I can reduce my view so that only those settings in those GPOs contain that particular keyword. I can save this off as a snapshot, so I can keep this for a later time and come back and look at what the state of my GPOs was at that later time. And then most importantly, I can actually run canned reports against the data, either against my whole domain or against the specific data that I've just exported. So what you see here are a set of canned reports, and here are those slow boot, slow logon reports that I mentioned. But you've got these canned reports like unlinked GPOs, conflicting or duplicate settings. Let's go ahead and run the conflicting settings report. And we have the ability to go take this data. Now, what I'm doing is I'm running a conflicting settings report on my engineering workstations OU to see what settings might be in conflict. So when that report comes back, what you're going to see are the settings that have been found to be potentially in conflict. So what you see is, like this first setting, rename guest account, no guest in this particular GPO set at the workstations OU level, and then it's set to engineering guest at the parent OU level. So I've been able to kind of call out opportunities to clean up my environment. And the same holds true for the duplicate settings report. We can get that information out of the GPOs that I've just exported into kind of a duplicate settings infrastructure or duplicate settings kind of scenario. Okay, let's take a quick look at the compliance manager. I'm kind of running through these quickly because I do want to have time to go through my hot tip. The compliance manager, as I mentioned, is designed to kind of give you that view of what's happened with group policy at my target system. So I can go out and remotely collect against an OU or a set of machines. I can collect data that I'm interested in. And then when I get that data back, I can go look at the results of the data, and I can see everything from the GPOs that applied, what DCs were what DC processed the last policy, when policy was last processed, slow link and loopback state, all of those metadata around GP processing, but also the settings. So I can get all of the settings information about group policy. So I can also search on the data. So let's say I wanted to ask of the domain, show me all the machines that have received minimum password age policy. So I'm going to go out and search all the data that I've collected and be able to get back that list of machines that have received the minimum password age settings. And then once I get that, I can go look at the values of those settings and see where they've been, what they've been delivered and which GPOs delivered them. So I'm going to just let that run. There we go. And so I can pick a machine and I can come here and it takes me right to that setting in the UI. You'll see minimum password age has been set to 2 and delivered by the default domain policy. So I'm able to get that kind of data out of the system to know exactly what GPO settings have been delivered. And the final kind of quick run through is our auditing and attestation product. So what you see here is the ability to do real-time group policy change auditing. You can see the date and time of a change, the GPO that was changed. In this case, a new GPO was created. It shows you the person that made the change. Here's a particular link that was changed on an OU. So that the link was changed from enabled here to disabled for this particular GPO. And then here you see a settings change related to BitLocker settings. So you've got the setting path and then the before and after value. Rollback is the ability to, the product will back up GPOs as they change, and then you can select a backup and essentially get back to a previous state of a GPO using the rollback feature within the product. And if I pick this particular GPO here, I have a couple different backups. One was the initial backup and then the daily backup of changed GPOs. And then finally, attestation. We have the ability in the product to assign owners to GPOs and have those owners periodically attest that the GPOs are still valid and useful in the environment. This helps you with that GPO sprawl problem. We also just introduced security group attestation in the latest version of the product, so we now can support attestation of security groups. So that was my really quick demo of all of the products. And with a few minutes left, what I want to do is ask a quick poll question and then go to my hot tip. And hopefully, while the poll is running, I can answer some other questions about folks. So one question is, do your products have the ability to see what AD account has modified a GPO last? And I think I just showed that yes, indeed, we do have that capability. Since denies shouldn't be used in GPs, and you mentioned that WMI might not be the most efficient, what's the best way to exclude servers, users, etc.? So what I will say is that security groups are probably your best way, your first line of defense in terms of targeting subgroups of folks within the environment. So security groups are, efficiently evaluated by the client. They're actually cached. The group memberships are cached by the group policy engine, so they can be fairly quickly evaluated. WMI filters are not bad depending on the WMI filter you're using. We actually have a free tool on our website called the WMI filter validation utility. If you go check that out, it will give you not only tell you when a filter passes or fails, but also the time it took to evaluate the filter. And so that can help you decide if a filter is going to be too expensive. If a filter is taking 2, 3, 4 seconds to evaluate on a particular machine or on a set of machines, that's probably not something you want to necessarily include because that could impact GP processing. It really just depends, but I'd say security group filters is the best starting point. Okay, thanks very much for the poll, and what I want to do now is get into our secret bonus tip. What is the secret bonus tip? Did you know group policy preferences settings can be applied to the local GPO? This is a super secret cool tip that I sort of knew in the back of my head, and I'm sure Kevin knew having worked at Desktop Standard, but it took me a little playing around to get this to work. And so what I want to do is quickly show you this tip, and then what we're going to do is blog about it and also make a free utility available to make it available to you. So what I have here in my environment, I'm going to go to my GPMC. I have a GPO that I created called Shortcut Test. Let me see if I can get to it here. Of course, when I'm pressed for time is when I can't find it easily. So let me go by group policy objects and go to the modified date, and this will show me, well, it should show me, didn't show me. Let's see. I created a GPO with a GP preferences shortcut in it. Actually, let me do this. Let me do a refresh, because I bet this GPO is not showing up. There it is, GPP shortcut. And if I go to the settings on this GPO, you'll see that I created a shortcut to create Notepad. It's just a Notepad shortcut that's going to appear on the desktop. Now, how did I do this? I'm going to walk through this really quickly. In Windows, see Windows System 32 group policy. This is where the local GPO stores its stuff. And if I go under the user section, you'll notice that I've created a folder here called preferences, and underneath there shortcuts, and underneath there's an XML file. How did I get this? If I go into the sysvol part of that GPO I created, that GPP shortcut GPO I just created, and I go in under the GUID of the GPO user folder, you'll notice that I have preferences, shortcuts, and then the shortcut XML file. What I did is I basically just copied the contents of this folder as is into the local GPO under the user side. Now that's not all I had to do. What I also had to do is I had to edit the gpt.ini file to include some GUID information. And again, I'm going to document this so everyone knows what it's all about. But essentially, I have done mimicked what the GP preferences does on domain level GPOs in the local GPO. Now, what I'm going to do quickly, now that that's in my local GPO, I'm going to run GP update. And notice the desktop after this runs. Notice what happens. Here you are, you've got a shortcut. That shortcut was delivered by the local GPO. So what happens is the local GPO has detected that GP preferences is in there. GP preferences knows how to run in the local GPO, and it's basically just done what it normally does. So you now have the ability, all of the features within GP preferences are now available in non-domain joined machines, essentially, or machines where you want to deliver GP preferences maybe in the image. Maybe you want to do some GP preferences tasks in your imaging process. You can do that in the local GPO. So I think this is a really cool tip. Again, I'm going to document this a little bit more, but I hope you find this useful and interesting. I'm going to go quickly back to my slides. And David, I think we're going to announce the winner of the contest.
Yes, sir, Darren, I've got that winner right here. We have randomly selected Robin L. From Oklahoma to win a $300 Apple gift card. So we'll be contacting Robin via email. Congratulations, and thanks for everyone who took the time out of their day to join us today. And thank you so much, Darren and Kevin. This has been a really excellent presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Darren, tell us a little bit about where should people go and what can they find over at your website when it comes to free tools.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So all of our products that I showed today have free trials available. If you just go to our website and click on the register for trial button for each of the product pages, you can get to a free trial. You can always ask questions of Kevin, myself, or any of our folks by going to sales or emailing sales@sdmsoftware.com. And I really do want to thank everyone for sticking with us for the extra few minutes. I know we ran over a little bit. We've got had a lot of content to cover, so I really appreciate it. And thanks to Kevin for joining as well.
Thank you. It was great, and thanks everyone for attending.